everybody. So grateful that you guys were able to join us for part 3 of our marriage accompaniment webinar. Today, I hope to go through some more of like the tips and suggestions of what makes a successful model of marriage accompaniment. And I'm hoping to also bring on John a little bit. So I'm excited to, he's just entered into the engagement world, and so he can be sort of a lens for us from there. And so, but I want to talk about some of the tips that I've seen for the entirety of the marriage catechumenate. So not just, I know I created the Endure program for marriage enrichment, but I've been looking at how do we better accompany from the start into discernment of marital life and then into engagement. I think we need to help couples better discern into that time. The engagement time, what do we do with them? How do we introduce them to aspects of theology and the creed, but then also give them practical tools that are going to prep them for the sacrament of marriage and then ongoing support. So let's jump in. If you haven't seen the first 2 webinars, I encourage you to go back and watch those. In those 2, we went more in depth on why it's important. And I think most of us are very clear of why it's important. I really think that the number one most important thing the church can be doing right now is entering into the field of marriage formation and post-baptismal formation. There's nothing really being done for those 2 areas. And there's such a need and a desire from those who are in those areas to be put in community and to be served. For the second one, we looked at more of trends. I walked through the Endure program a little bit, what I found to be successful, what I've been seeing, especially in those areas of newly married families, those who are about to have their kids sort of graduate from high school, that 15 to 20 years married, and then those who are entering retirement. Those are like 3 key trends where I find that there's just such a need for parishes to support further in marriage and for them to do a deep dive there. And so today, we're going to look more on the tips and suggestions. To do that, though, I want to sort of unpack the road to Emmaus for us today. And so this is going to be sort of our little... the road to Emmaus is the model of the catechumenate, right? It's the model which Pope Francis talks about when he acknowledges it, when he talks about the marriage catechumenate, when he started talking about that in 2015. But the road to Emmaus needs to be our way of forming moving forward. So often we are we're trying to meet people, but we're way separated from them. So we have to actually meet them on the road. And so if you look at the story of the road to Emmaus, these 2 disciples, right, they're leaving the church. They're walking away from Jerusalem. And where the rest of the church community is, they're experiencing anxiety, fear, they're nervous, they're worried, and they don't have answers. They don't have a place to go. And in walks Jesus, and Jesus just walks alongside them and listens to them. He doesn't just jump right in and share faith with them. He doesn't jump right in and try to rebuke and explain exactly what's happening. He just hears their worries, their stresses. And as people in charge of walking with couples, I think that's what we have to do. We need to meet them. The majority of the couples that we are going to see and have to accompany, they are walking away. They're back here because of some cultural feeling or obligation or a family obligation of wanting to get married in a church. But for the majority of them, it's not a personal investment of why they're doing that. And even for those people who are searching for marriage, who are practicing the faith, they're still longing for a community and a support system, especially if then they're in that young adult time. And so I said in the last video that that's like the key moment of loneliness right now, that and then in retirement. And so how as a church are we welcoming them into this process, giving them the tools to effectively discern this lifelong union that they're going to enter into? And so if we keep following the road to Emmaus story, he meets them on the road, he listens to them, he hears them. It's only after he understands their story and who they are fully, then he puts that rebuke out there. Then he puts that statement of, did you not hear what was supposed to happen? And then what I love about the next part of the road to Emmaus is that he then shares where he is present within the scriptures. They're not giving him multiple things of theology. They're not diving deep into, he's showing him where he was present in the Old Testament and in what was going to be foreshadowed. And so I think at times we have to realize that a lot of the families that are coming to us, they've never experienced that, or the couples, they've never experienced the charisma. They've never experienced that personal intimacy of what the gospel message is supposed to drive us to and inspire us to. After that, their hearts start to burn within inside them. They don't realize it yet, but that engagement of the gospel message, the good news, has inspired them. And one of my favorite parts happens is that they keep walking, or Jesus keeps walking, and they invite him into their home. Or Jesus doesn't invite himself into their home. They invite him into their home for a meal. And it's through that personal invitation, accepting Christ into their home, into their life, that eventually they're able to be transformed. They're able to see God see God fully, and realize that this whole time that God has been present to them. And so I just want you to keep this lens in mind as we talk about marriage accompaniment, because this is what we need to do. We need to meet them in the real reality, the skills, the tools that they need to have successful marriages. We need to introduce them to the charisma, to the gospel message. We need to help them and bring faith, this gospel message, into their everyday life in the home. And only after then are they going to be inspired to engage with the church community. And so you might be able to get them periodically all throughout, but those elements need to be present in a marriage formation. Right? And so often at times we can try to truncate marriage formation. We try to put it into like a weekend experience, right? We might dislocate it from the parish or somewhere else. And so what are some of these elements that we have to be putting into practice? I think why this is important is that evangelization in the New Directory says that even if it was a linear process at one time, it's no longer that linear process now, right? And so the best way I've seen it explained is sort of through this pyramid approach, where embracing the mystery is that human experience where we're helping them realize that God is already within their life. Then we introduce them to the charisma, which is the encounter mystery. It's after that, then we can introduce them to the creed and what we believe, the sacraments, how to live it, and then pray. And then as we continue to revisit those different mysteries and how God is working within our lives through just our human life, through the acceptance of the gospel, through knowing the creed, participating in the sacraments, and living and praying, that pyramid starts to expand and get stronger and stronger. And we're able to more enter into what's next. And so I think we're working with a lot of couples who have a very small pyramid. And so how do we acknowledge that and then help begin that expansion for them through marriage formation? I found that there's a few key things that on any stage it needs to be there. I think the number one thing that the church is calling for us, and I've seen this in a ton of tools that have been being developed, but then all the documents, is that we're called to be more intentional with the people we're trying to serve. We need to know those people, right? And so
2:10 p.m.
Pope Francis says that we need to smell like our sheep, but like, how do we actually know who we're serving, getting to know their stories, where they're coming from, making that first welcome back in. So often when a couple calls to get married, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, maybe they won't reach anybody. If they do reach anybody, they start going through like a series of questions so that they're hitting all those obligations rather than a congratulations, a warm invitation. And so how are we getting to know those couples that are coming through our parish? Do we really know what they're struggling with, what they're excited about being married? What are they bringing with them? We also need to figure out how to make it practical. Everything we are doing needs to be a bridge back to something that's going on in their life, a human experience, right? So whatever the theology idea is, we need to show them how to make that connection back into their day life. The more we can show that we're here to support them in the lived reality of life, rather than just trying to show them the ideal, I think we can then lead them to that ideal more effectively. So the more we can, they see that we're here to serve them and to meet them and to support them, we then can be witnesses to the ideal of what a sacramental marriage is meant to be. It also has to be holistic. So we need to be able to form them not just in intellectual way, but teach them how to pray with one another, enter into that spiritual life with each other and individually. So most of the times they don't have an individual prayer life. And if they don't have that, they're not going to be able to do being able to learn how to pray with each other. Most of the times we have learned how to repeat prayers, but we don't know how to actually have an intimate prayer with God, and then throw in another individual into that. How do you go about that? We also need to look at the pastoral situations that they're given, pastoral formation, and then, as I said, the practical side, that human formation. So how are we integrating all four of those areas of formation into our accompaniment process? The other one that I find that is a lot of times disengaged from marriage resources is a communal engagement. And so it's putting them together with other people of their peers, and then also mentorship from the parish. So often marriage stuff is done for the couple, which is great, and that's needed. But the couple also needs a network of support that is their peers, and then also that is through mentorship. And so how at the parish levels or the diocesan level, how are we connecting these communities that will continue beyond whatever that program is being run? And then how are those communal networks then, and little marriage networks, sustained after they're run? Right? We don't want to just keep running programs, putting them in community, and then we never following up. We want to create this lifelong process where they experience marriage, they can go through some of marriage enrichment experience, and then they feel like they're connected by the church periodically. I've seen this done in a couple different ways. I've seen this done through different date nights that the parish has hosted, through different retreats that they have done throughout the fall or throughout Advent and Lent, trying to invite these families in, but then also making those events accessible to them. So you can't run a marriage event and not have like babysitting attached to it. You cannot do a marriage event at a certain particular day if you want young families to come. So it's trying to work around their schedules, and it might put a little bit more work onto the parish to figure out how you're going to do babysitting, how we're going to feed some people. But doing all of that shows that we're there to support them and be present. And what I find is when you do that, it further engages them into the parish and wants them to serve. The goal is that put them part of these networks where they're serving other couples, where they see that their relationship is there to be a witness for other relationships. And if you put the intentional time in with this smaller group, it'll eventually grow, and they'll be serving the next group and the next group. These are just two great lines from the New Directory and then from the Joy of the Gospel. The New Directory says that at the heart of the parish presentation of evangelization is not a pastoral strategy, much less an elite exclusive group of the perfect and the experts, but a community of missionary disciples. That's the type of parish we need to get back to, right? This idea that everyone in here is a family of families, and we're called to serve one another. So often in our parishes today, even those who are actively practicing, we go to Mass, we do our obligation, and then we're out. We're not engaging in the communal life of the parish community. So how do we foster that? One of the successes I've seen with that is that running these marriage enrichment experiences in a communal way helps them want to engage in the liturgies together and then participate in the communal life of the parish beyond just these programs that we're running. In the Joy of the Gospel, the church also says that the only way that this is possible is that we need to initiate everybody, right? And so it's the art of accompaniment means that we start small, right? So Jesus started with 12, and he actually even narrowed that down to 3 people that he intentionally worked even harder with. But the multiplication of discipleship happens very rapidly. If you put that intentionality within people in a few years, it begins to expand. And so I've seen that with the marriage program itself. We heavily worked with the first group, and they got so excited. Those groups remained together, and they invited the next group of people to come in. And then you eventually do this a few times, and you get to see that there's this network of couples who are part of your parish who are excited to reach out to that person who they're seeing on a weekly basis, make that relationship, make that connection. I wanted to share some feedbacks that I have received from doing marriage enrichment. I think there's I've been very grateful for the different fruits that have come from the Endure program, but then also walking with couples and seeing how it's been engaging through our family faith formation experience. And this was one of the first ones I've ever received when I ran it the first time. This was one of the wives, and she said, currently, aside from this group, there has been no area in which the parish has concretely supported my marriage or other people's marriage that I know. Aside from the mandated classes, I have not seen anything. And it is not as if we would not want to participate or have a desire to, or have no desire to. This group has been what we have needed for a long time to engage with other couples who have the same faith as us and are in marriage timeframes, the same marriage timeframes as us, and who want to put effort into their marriages and communicate. And so when I first ran this, I ran it for just young adults. So they were under the age of 40. This couple was fit in that age range, and they had been just going through the motions. I think they had been married for 4 years, and they just had no entryway to engage with the community. They wanted to participate, but there was just no way for them to participate. And so I think what's tough is like we wonder where people are and how to invite them back and meet them. But the reality is if we have nothing to bring them to, that becomes a challenge. And so the more we can form a few to start to do more things for couples and spouses and families, I think the smarter, the more effective our parish communities are going to be. Another great one, I think I shared this briefly, might have in one of the last ones, but my favorite one that I've ever had was my first time running this at St. Bartholomew's. I had one of my best catechists that I have for our family faith formation program. They decided not to do the Endure program because their spouse wasn't Catholic. And so they felt like they might not be able to, or they would feel uncomfortable. One of the other couples who was going through the Endure program reached out and said, hey, would you mind reaching out to them? I think they really want to do it, but they feel uncomfortable. So I reached out to them. And I talked to Peggy and I said, hey, like you can definitely do it. I'll be happy to talk to your spouse and explain like there's going to be Catholic elements, but there's also the skills. And I think you'll build off of the skills. And so they participated in that first go that we had at St. Bartholomew's. And I would check in with the spouse over the time. And the first time I met with him, he said, I'm not doing any of the massing and I'm not doing any of the praying. And I said, that's not a problem. You don't have to do any of that. And so we went through the whole series. I kept checking in. He felt comfortable throughout the whole time. And then it concludes the Endure program with this mass where we do a little blessing over all the couples. And I got up there a little late. I get into the pew. I look to the right, and there he is, the guy who said he would never engage with one of these masses. They'd been married for 30 years. They had not participated in he had not participated in a mass with her throughout that 30 years, but she was there. And so I was like mouthing to him. I was like, what are you doing here? And he goes and says, I'll talk to you afterwards. And so we afterwards we meet, and he just said that, like, I don't know what I believe about this. And I don't think I really believe about it, but I do know that this is important to her and I want to be present here for her. So that was exciting on its own. But then fast forward a year later, I get a call from him and we were running the program again. And he says, I would love to be the head of your hospitality. I've been meeting with our group on a monthly basis since we had our last experience. And it's been so fruitful for me. I want to help other people have this. And so that's just one person, right? One story. And I have no idea where his faith life is going to go from this. But that's why I think we need to create these experiences that meet them in the human reality and then help them enter in. Like, it doesn't mean that it might take them a while to get to where we want them to be in this ideal world, but it's definitely a helpful experience. I was going to have a couple on here if we can keep them in your prayers. It's Bill and Carol. Unfortunately, Carol lost her dad earlier last week, and so they had the funerals and stuff this week, so I couldn't have them on. But a couple out in California, I did a virtual version of my Endure program, and so they did it for about 30 couples out in California. And what was exciting was to see the fruits that were coming from there. They had a marriage ministry, but they were struggling to find volunteers to help out with the different areas. So pre-Cana, doing ongoing marriage stuff. And so they ran Endure as a way to support that and to try to see if they can find some new volunteers to come in. And so they reached out to all the couples that they had been helping out with. They got those 30 couples. They were ranging from all over age ranges. But as it was going, they started to realize that people were already starting to participate. One of the people in the program owned a restaurant, and they began to feed them every week. That they would have sessions, and especially the end retreat. They did a nice big meal that was all sponsored by that participant. They were able to find people for their marriage ministry program, and so now they have like pre-Cana mentor couples for this. They have a ton of new volunteers because they've been inspired, they've been fed, now they want to serve other people. And that's what the beauty of the catechumenal process is that when we actually follow that process, we can't just hold on to the faith from ourselves. We want to share it with other people. But I think a lot of times we form intellectually and we're not putting them through that process of the catechumenate. So I'm going to have a conversation with John in a second, but I wanted to finish up with these different just some helpful resources and tools that are out there. And so the Endure program is the one I've been talking about. That's the one I developed for my dissertation. I've published that with the Pathways Formation Suite. So Pathways does a bunch of family faith formation resources. But they connected to the same model that I have intentionality of walking with marriages and young families. And so I'm helping them now build out a whole marriage catechumenate, starting with Endure, and then building from there, doing a discernment resource for ongoing, for couples going into pre-Cana, then a pre-Cana resource, and then doing more ongoing stuff for like date nights and stuff for to fill out that marriage catechumenate. And so what I find is that we need to find a place to start. And so we have to do pre-Cana, that's there. But I think we need to also support an ongoing support of getting mentorship and having people that can model what good, authentic Catholic marriages are. And so I find starting with a thing like an Endure helps you build out the team that's necessary for running the rest of the marriage catechumenate. So it's not a lot of parishes that I talk to, they struggle with finding mentors for their pre-Cana couples, or they might not have things. Once they run an event, they might not have things to invite them to. And so you got to find a place to start somewhere. Where I do find it's helpful if you can form people that can help you form other people, that's the ideal. And so Endure and Pathways, definitely great resources. Others that I've used as well or have had connections to is Witness to Love has an amazing pre-Cana program that has that intentionality and that mentorship built into their product, into their process and their system. They also have a great tools for convalidation that I've used as well. So it's a video series based. There's also some stuff that happens at the parish, but I would definitely encourage you to check that out. We also have, you also have Communio, which is more of a full system marriage formation program where they can come in and help you do some outreach and find out like where are these couples that may have fallen away and how do you do outreach to them? How do you connect to them? They also provide you like date night ideas and different things you can do. That can be even more effective if you can connect to other parishes that you can do it like a cluster of you guys together. They can come in and do that for your diocese. What's helpful with that is that it really helps you be missional and do that out on the road journey, like meet them where they are, try to invite them into a skills building thing, something that will bring them in. The key thing with them is that you need to have things that then you're inviting them to, and then you can continue that journey with. So you want to be able to have a team that can support that influx. So I've seen dioceses who've connected to community or parish groups, and it brings in this influx of people, but then you need the people that can serve those, right? And you want to be able to serve them effectively. So for that, I'm going to invite John back on. I wanted to have a conversation with him because he's just got engaged. We can congratulate him. That was just this past week. So but I think it's exciting to see. So I've been married for 8 years. I've seen sort of the lack of support of marriages within, especially for young families and that early ages of marriage. But I would love to just get some of your input of like, how's it been now that you're trying to find that church, you're trying to get to you're trying to figure out your venues and like all the stuff, all the craziness that's about to begin for you.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is freshly new. It's only, I only got engaged last week, so it is relatively new. But as I was telling you before we went live, just sort of like putting on my church minister hat versus like being one half of a couple trying to get married in the church. it's not for the weak of heart is how I would phrase it. Like I talk a lot about the importance of fortitude when it comes to like young adult ministry, but I also think about it a lot when it comes to sacramental prep and marriage, like prep type stuff, because often, and I've looked at a few churches already, like 4 or 5, and I think there's always this issue I find, and I'm looking at 2 different dioceses. I'm reside in the Archdiocese of Washington. I'm a parishioner at a parish, and then my fiance is a parishioner in a parish in the Archdiocese of Newark. And so there's some similarities and some differences in how they kind of approach that stuff. But I think like one of the things I've learned early on, and I know I've heard this from stories, I'm 30, I just turned 36. I've heard this from stories from people a decade ago who got married, that the biggest challenge tends to be that first step of like, how do I get married in the Catholic Church? And like, not even just like the, who do I call question, but like, what do I need prepped? Because a lot of times the people who will first take your call, and it's usually a call, not an email, is going to be the secretary. And that's fine. But, we at the center always have this phrase, like the secretary serves as like the gatekeeper to the faith a lot of times. Mm-hmm. And often it's not a question of like, to your point, it's not a point of like celebration of like, oh, this couple wants to, for whatever reason, be married in the church, like the prodigal son, let's celebrate this event. It's more of a question of like, well, are you a registered parishioner? Do you have your baptismal certificate? Do you know where it is? Like these kinds of like very logistical, bureaucratic decisions that make it feel no different than getting married in like City Hall. Mm-hmm. And in some ways more burdensome than getting married in City Hall. Yeah. And as a faithful Catholic who knows he wants to be married in the church, it's kind of disheartening when I start making those parallels between like the civil authority and the church authority being kind of the same. Being married in the church is a celebration of the union of 2 people into one entity. And often it doesn't feel that way. It just kind of feels like the end result of a lot of like hurdles. Yeah. So at least that's like my initial thoughts. And I've already run into the issue of like, for instance, because I live in DC, she splits her time between New Jersey and DC. Like we already know when it comes to the marriage prep side of things, we're probably going to have to like split our time and try to figure out times in which I can like take off work to go there for marriage prep. Yeah. And like in the age of Zoom, it probably shouldn't be that way. But I already know that's probably going to be the case. But if I didn't have the resolve and fortitude, I don't know, again, putting my church hat back on, I don't know if that's the best strategy for us. Mm-hmm. If we're basically creating more burdens than necessary because, in one of your previous ones, you talked about the fact that couples are getting older before they get married, so they're going to have careers, they're going to have jobs. Like, it's not like I was with my parents who celebrated 44 years of marriage. Mm-hmm. My mom was about 21 or 22 when she got married. That existence isn't quite the norm anymore.
Yeah. And what I find too, is that's why that intentionality is so key. Like how often, and so Endure begins with this visit. And so you meet with each couple before they engage and allows you to put them in the proper small group that they need to be in. And I've used this now for all of my faith formation experiences. And like, that's how Pathways sort of begins their resources, is that you meet with each family, and for each couple, because like each couple might have a different like little path that they have to go on. And so I think so often we want people to just fit into like, okay, our systems that we have in place. But unfortunately, the church is saying like, we can't just have one system, right? Like there has to be different ways, roadmaps. And so I heard this great analogy the other day that using the way of St. James. And so I got to go there 2 years ago. We were supposed to go during COVID, and then I got disrupted. And then we had our first child, COVID happened. And then before we had our second one, our in-laws were like, just go, because you're never going to be able to go again. If you have 2 of them, it's going to be even harder. So we went, and what's beautiful at the Way of St. James is there are multiple different paths to get to Santiago de Compostela, right? So you have the main way, that they brought St. James back. But the reality is that there are multiple pilgrimages that you can take. And right now we're in the Eucharistic revival that's happening. You had 4 different places that came. Some were shorter, some were longer. Some went through like extreme heat. Some went through like the cold. But the reality is like that's what each of our people are going through. They're coming through this pilgrimages of life. And for you're already engaged in the faith. You're participating. You have that part. And so like how I have to respond to you is different than I have to respond to that person who's just coming there because grandma wants me to get married in the
absolutely.
church. And then that continues beyond, right? So as we're engaging these couples who are married, whether that be in the first 5 years or 20 years down the road, they're coming with this experience of life. And we have to understand that, to understand where on this journey, on this pilgrimage, do we have to meet them to begin to walk with them effectively. It's hard at times to try to just plug them into like a certain thing or a certain, like we do it on this day. And that's why the community is so important, is that because one person can't run multiple different events, right? But you can create a process where multiple people are trying to support marriages, and you can plug them into those different people, give them some mentorship, or maybe there's a community that meets that came off of one of your marriage enrichment programs, and you can connect them to that. But it's trying to use the community of what it was originally intended to. And the other thing I heard recently is that the early apostles, they were never afraid to get martyred for the faith. They didn't know what that really was, martyrdom was, but they weren't afraid to die for this cause that they had set, because they knew that the church community was there to support their families.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's something beautiful to that. Like, thank God that at least in the United States, we don't have to worry about martyrdom, right? Martyrdom is definitely happening still in other parts of the world. But to have that much confidence within our faith community, that I know that my brother and sister sitting in that pew will take care of my family, right? I feel like that's the thing that we've lost that the early church had, right? This idea that we do have a support system here. And I got to experience that support system at a very young age, and my family did as well. And so my family, I would say my mom was definitely very heavily Catholic, but my dad sort of got just dragged along until he joined the Knights of Columbus, and then now he's more invested. But we had a pretty little rough tragedy when I was 5. We had a house fire, and the house basically totaled. And I remember this clear as day, and I think this is why I'm so passionate about trying to integrate community, parish community, is that we lost everything, and so we show up one day, and the pastor of the church is there, and he says, "Oh, come with me to my family." They showed up at my grandparents' house, and they had keys, and they leased a apartment. They got the whole parish together, and they leased an apartment for 3 months for us. And we walked into the apartment, and there were like just cans and cans of like clothes, toys, like everything. They did like this whole drive, and that's something that I think you actually see regularly. When there's tragedy, the church comes together and we go, and we're great. But it doesn't have to be that way, right? We can be that community all the time, and we can be there as a support system. And I think that's what we want as a society. We want this connection. No matter you're getting married, you're newly married, your kids are about to leave, and you're looking for how to re-engage with your spouse, or you're retiring. Like you're wanting that support system so you can share some of these life experiences that you're having, good or bad.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot often of this idea, the study, I think it was Pew or Gallup did a couple years ago about this rising loneliness in people and the lack of connection to the wider communities. When I went to Catholic U around the same time you did, I got my degree in politics. And so one of the seminal books they always make you read is Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam, which is a sociology book about the idea of like lack of civic engagement. But I think as church leaders, the church for hundreds of years was the lifeline in the United States for civic engagement and civic life and just communal life for people. And I think over the years, we've kind of lost that connection. And I appreciate like programs like Endure and others that take that look of, faith is not something, especially the Catholic faith is not something that is lived alone, that is lived with others, whether it's your spouse, and that should be the primary group. But we as human beings need other connections of shared people to sort of grow our own sort of existence, but also our faith life. Living as Missionary Disciples, which is a book we use a lot here from the Bishops' Conference, emphasizes community for that exact reason. Yeah. That, which is ironic because more and more people are feeling isolated. But if the church serves as that bridge of community for people, it serves as a great lifeline for a variety of things, let alone the sort of faith stuff, just even the human development. They become less depressed. They become less like socially isolated. They become better contributors to society. And I think often the church for many years, like millennia, has been that solution. Can we do that in small ways in our own parishes? And I think often like marriage couples is one of those like primary ways, because you're getting people at the point in which either hopefully you get them before crisis, like you're pointing out, but you can get them to build the life skills to understand the value of faith and the understanding the value of the faith community to help serve others. And I always think that has a certain level of value.
Yeah. And what I find, right, so we have the structure. It's just we have to change the structure, because all of our resources go into child formation, right? And so like the K through 8th grade model of formation. And so I've been doing a decent amount of work recently with the USCCB and the new catechetical process. And the one thing that I keep talking about is that like families don't begin in kindergarten, right? They begin at marriage. That's when they begin. And so we need to rethink, and what's hard to do this, and what's crazy is that how we approach like catechesis or religious education has only been around for like 4 decades. Like it started in 1996. Like that's when we started using these books, and like they had the like Baltimore Catechism before that, right. And then it was like people doing whatever they wanted before that. But the reality is we've been stuck in this model for the last few decades. But I think the majority of people, we know that we need to serve this larger population, but because we're stuck in that model, we're like, oh, how do we do this? And then so much has been thrown on to an individual, like a DRE or like even a pastor, like they're just being put in. And so what I find is like the first step to all of this is you need to build out a larger team, right? And so what we did at St. Bartholomew is we created this team called the Emmaus Coalition, based on that story of how we accompany people through the catechumenal process, but then also through the life cycle. And then making sure that they're being journeyed with into that next phase, like wherever they're going, like okay, we can connect them. So like our college kids can go to the young adults can go to back and start participating in these adult things that we're doing in the church. But that there's some eyes on these people that we're walking with and trying to journey with. And I do find that's the struggle, is that we haven't formed those core teams, or like it's spread out ministerial responsibility. We sort of become locked in with a few at times, and that's not everywhere. I mean, I feel like that's more common, like in the Northeast and like maybe out in the like upper parts of the like the West and the Northeast. But I feel like you get more engagement a little bit more South. But the reality is that ministry was never meant to be done alone. I do think if we migrate into looking at an ongoing support system through beyond the sacraments, starting with marriage and into baptism, you'll start to see a more fruitful life within parish communities. But it's not an easy thing. It just can't just happen. And the hardest part too is like you can run one thing. And so I remember Father Frank saying this, and then my director for saying this. It's like, you don't want to just run an event and then that's it. Like it's like no, like how does this feed them back into a life support system so that they know that the church is here for them. And that's the hardest part. It's like, how do you continue that accompaniment? And the only way I've found that to be effective is like you just need more people to engage with that. And so it's okay to start small, because you can't really serve that many people at once, but it grows very rapidly afterwards. So
yeah, I mean, I think often about like too often the solution is like, I've been thinking about this because I also teach a grad class on management and leadership. So I've been thinking a lot about this idea of like shared baptismal call to mission. That, you know, the people on this call or on this webinar already understand that sort of idea, like that we are called to serve others in this kind of thing. But often, you know, as a volunteer, or not even volunteer, just like a general church Sunday goer, does not really fully understand that like our mission isn't just what we receive from God, but what we give to our fellow brothers and sisters. And I think often like that is if we understand that basic understanding of our formation and our baptismal call, I think the question of the point of view of like expanding out, like that's the way to do it. So what would be a way to help raise that understanding that it's not just like the old model of sort of pay, pray, and obey.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, yeah, definitely. And there are a ton of tools that are out there, right? So there's like, I named a few of the marriage prep stuff. The one thing I find that a lot of the marriage prep stuff does, it separates that from the communal engagement, right? So it's a lot of focus on the couple. I think you can adapt a lot of those resources to being more communal, but I think the more we can help put the network together, I think the more effective it's going to be. And then it's through those human experiences that you then can shed light on, oh, there's something here, right? It's not just going to naturally happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to let them experience it and realize that, oh, I've been served and now I'm called to serve. But the beauty about our faith is that if we truly believe in the gospel, it's hard to just sit with the gospel.
Right.
The gospel should inspire us to go out and share it with other people. And even if we're nervous, we don't feel like we have the skill sets to do it. What I find is that it's like the more you trust, and it goes back to that pyramid of like the more that pyramid grows and you're stronger in your foundation and you understand that God is at work in your life and that you have experienced them, you're receiving the sacraments, you're able to then be a better witness out to others. So when it comes to the actual whatever people are going to do, we just have to start doing something for this group in there. And we have this weird opportunity right now where there's people who are culturally still there, mm-hmm. and they see a need, and we can use that as the window of that. Hey, we want to support you. We want to give you the skills that are going to make it successful. And what I find is that when we wait to the kindergarten time to engage with families, right? They've already connected to their school family. They've already connected to their curricular activity family, sport, or whatever they're in. And then we come in, we get them, and we say, oh, we're here to support your family. And the big awakening, I think I might share this the last time that came to me, is that 25% of those families that we're now re-engaging and saying that this community is here and you're supposed to be your most important. It's supposed to be your most important, but then also that we want to be there to support you. We're saying that to 25% of people who have already gone to a divorce or separated.
Right.
And that's what sort of blew my mind of like, yeah, we can't just stay here. We got to move this, because some of those marriages, what we say a lot of divorces can, or what the data says is that a lot of divorces can be prevented if they had the proper tools. Mm-hmm. Right. And one of those tools is an authentic faith community. Like stronger marriages come from those who truly believe and practice the faith. Yeah. Our vocations come from well-formed families, right? Like so the new data from about priesthood just came out, and they like almost 90-something% of them came from a family that actively was practicing their faith.
And so, actively supported vocations, whatever they turn out to be.
That's right. Yeah. So it's just like this, if we can fix that, and it will affect everything. Because as John Paul II, right? By the way, family goes by the way of society. John Paul II said, right? Or sort of society goes by the way of the family. Reverse it. So and so if we see that, right? If we have a failure of family, society is going to start to crumble, because society is built on this lowest common denominator of the family.
As a newly engaged person going through the process of going through pre-Cana, I should say, what is the one thing, based on the current models that exist, but also based on what you've seen in terms of getting people when they are actually married, what's the one thing that you think would help couples best in the pre-Cana process to help strengthen their marriages to avoid that sort of 25% cliff?
Yeah, I think the most important thing, and this is what Witness to Love really integrated into theirs, is the mentorship component. And this is why I find that, even so I'm at a new parish now, I just switched roles, and we're going to run an Endure experience in the hopes to find marriage mentors for our engaged couples, because we don't have one of that here. We had that at St. Bart's. And so I find that that's the key. And those mentors are people that you can continue on beyond your marriage. So you can have like 4 or 5 sessions with them before your wedding, where you can hear sort of, and then those people, what you're looking for are people who are authentically Catholic, but also authentically human. And so that they are living life, they're participating, they're trying their best, and that they've tried to make this work. And normally I say like try to go like 10 years out or so and so you can get that experience of what that was like. So I find that that's key, because then you have a support system to connect to the next thing. What I would say is right from there, once you have that mentorship, you keep that mentorship, and then you get your core community of families that are other spouses that you can now journey young married life with. Or it doesn't have to be like you're like buddy friends, but like to say that, hey, we want to support each other in this. And I feel like a lot of friendships come out of that. Like a lot of authenticity comes out of that. But so I would say those are the number one thing would be the mentorship, because the irony is that how we do formation now, right, we're in a lot of dioceses, we just throw a ton of information at people in a 2-day period through these workshops. And we'll go through the entirety of the theology of marriage, and then we'll go through the skills. But that's like, and I try to give the analogy, it's like trying to teach somebody how to build a deck and giving them one crash course and then having them wait 9 months and then say, okay, or a year, like if the marriage is a year, right? So, and then say, okay, now go build that deck. And it's like we don't remember all that stuff, right? But if you have those are relationships that have been built throughout your pre-K, and then you have somebody to check in with and say, hey, you know what? I think we heard something about this, but like, how we should be focused on this? I think that's key. And then you have somebody, that group after the fact, where you now can sort of workshop some of this stuff, and you can be like, hey, you know what? I've been struggling with my in-laws, or like, you know, we argue this way, and I don't know, like how have you guys addressed this? And so you have the people to bounce that.
I think that's actually super important, and something I think you've talked about too before is this point of communication and authentic witness is the way I would phrase it, of like the humanity of marriage. That it's not all just like beautiful days and like, you know, Instagram posts and all this kind of things that, you know, taking more of a millennial example of this, but there is hard work in a marriage. And like, I think our pre-Cana stuff does a good job of explaining like the life skill side of it, but like, you know, conflict, communication, forgiveness is a ongoing challenge. And how do you maintain that even when there's like fundamental, not like theological, but like fundamental differences of like, do I want my child to play sports or not, you know, or what sport or whatever. Yeah.
And it gets to the nitty gritty. Like there's so much stuff. So it's impossible in one preparation time to go through it all. And then where that really becomes necessary to be able to fall back on is like when you're in it and you have that big blow up, you have that big argument. And so one of the things I share with pre-Cana couples, right? So the majority of couples who we see, they're already living together, right? And we can talk about all the theological sides of why that is not good, but that's can cause some struggles moving forward. But so many people wrongly too say that that's an impediment to marriage, which is not. Like they can still get married. That doesn't stop them. But when I get down to like the nitty gritty of it, and so what we do know from like science and sociology, psychology, is that when you aren't living together, you have a threshold moment when you move your stuff in with each other. But if you're living with each other, that threshold moment, it's like this change of life moment, doesn't happen. And so when that does happen, that happens during that first big argument. Like you got a big blow up argument, and it's the first time you're like, oh, I can't just leave here. Like I got to work this thing out. And for most young couples, at least when this happens, like you're in this small like bedroom apartment. So there's really no space to even escape to. And so it becomes a challenge. I think the more we can show them that like science and theology and like psychology and theology, like it's very mimicked. So when I was doing all this stuff for the marriage program, I was just fascinating how much what we know about psychology fits into the theology behind what we are trying to help people understand, right? That because we truly believe that God designed marriage, right? That God built this. And so it has to be built on our human desires and our human wants and what's going to lead us to human happiness and success. So I think if we can help couples understand that more, that because it is specifically designed and instituted by God, it's built into who we are as humans to fit. And so we have to just help them understand that model. I don't know if there's any questions I know we're going to come up at our time, if there's any questions from anybody, but if you watched all of the webinars or if you have any questions about what we were talking about today. This was really meant to just be a wrap up to give some tools. And
I just pulled up a thing for the past 2 videos in case someone wants to watch Stephen's other presentations. Those are available for free on YouTube. So feel free to share those. Those are free to share. But I guess as a wrap-up question, sort of for the whole series, but what is the biggest, let's say, fruit of really being intentional about doing all the things we've talked about, like expanding your mentor group, being very intentional about marriage mentorship couples for both those who are preparing to be married, those who are experiencing sort of like younger-ish married couples, and then those who are sort of empty nester marriage couples. Like what is the ultimate fruit for the parish ultimately? Because unfortunately, as much as we don't like to talk about it, monetary, labor, or whatever you want to call it, like hours, like resources are devoted to this stuff.
Yeah.
So if I was trying to explain this to a pastor, like this is why we need to do it.
Yeah.
What is the fruit that you've seen throughout your studies, your years of experience, your new role in faith and family life ministries? Like what are those fruits that someone should be looking towards?
Yeah, I would say that the number one fruit, and that's why we called our ongoing support resource Wellspring, is that it helps them see, like if you truly put someone through that catechumenal model, give them community, show them the practical, be that bridge from the practical to how the gospel and our faith is going to further illuminate those things. You see within the couple that there is this wellspring and this new energy that is put into, and like they're able to actually tap into the grace that they were given at the sacrament, or they're able to seek the grace if they haven't done the sacrament of marriage yet. But that grace is now starting to come alive, and I feel like that's the thing that we miss at the with all of our sacraments. We do so much prep ahead of time, and then the actual utilizing of the grace, and how do you actually put that into work now that you've received the grace. So I think that's one. And then I think from that, because they're filled up and they're energized, and that they feel like because when your family life is strong, everything else starts to work. And when your family is not strong, everything else seems to be falling apart, right? So if your family life is strong and your spouse is, especially with your spouse, then you're calmer with your kids, you're more patient with your kids. Like all those virtues just start to trickle down. Same thing at work. It's like if you're coming home to a place where you can communicate well, where your expectations are heard, then when you're at work, even if you're having a rough day, you have somebody to come back to you to share that with. So that wealth of that wellspring that happens then trickles into the support of others. And I think that's what we want as a church, is that like it becomes so abundant that I don't need it just for me. I want to have other people to share that abundance. And so I've seen that now through finances. I've seen that through people sharing their gifts and getting more active in the community. So I just switched from St. Bartholomew's to St. Vincent's. And then I'm now the executive director of the Pathways Formation Suite for Faith and Family Life. But the St. Bartholomew's continue that marriage ministry by people who went through the marriage program. We found our new DRE because he went through the marriage program, and he wants to now share that with other faith formation families as a whole. And so I think it creates this longevity of sort of multiplication of this of discipleship of ministry on a stewardship level for finances, but then also on giving of gifts. And I think that's what our churches need today. We need to unlock those gifts within people, because everyone has this gift to share. So often right now, if they are doing some type of gift, they just want to give the money and then get out at times. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, no, like you have a gift to share that God has given you besides just the financial role. And so I think the church is going to need more key volunteers in place. And this is an approach that could help do that.
I think on that note, I want to thank you, Stephen, for your help with this. I accidentally dropped out early, so I will for those who are new to this. This is Dr. Stephen Serafin. He's the new executive director of Faith and Family Life Catholic Ministries, and he was previously at St. Bartholomew's, but now is at St. Vincent Martyr in Madison, New Jersey. And so he's the creator of Endure, a marriage enrichment initiative, and he graduated from Catholic University with a doctorate in ministry in 2022, which focused on this, which led to Endure.
Yes.
So, though I feel like many people will see this after, so I appreciate, Stephen, you participating in all 3 of these webinars. And for those who had attended this, we will have this recording up on YouTube, hopefully in the next week. And as I mentioned before, the rest of the series is already available online on YouTube, so please feel free to watch those if you haven't, and also share those as well. They're all very good and talk about similar sort of aspects of marriage accompaniment, which I think is, as I've learned a lot and I'm going through now, but I think is something that will yield much fruit for our Catholic communities in the years to come. So thank you, Dr. Serafin or Dr. Stephen, for your work in this. And if you haven't already, please follow the Catholic Apostolate Center on social media with the hopes of sharing the gospel. And with that, I thank you and have a good day.
Thanks, John.